Okay, we're live on time, on schedule, 6 o'clock. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. You're talking today with, let me introduce the conference call first. So we started this project in 2014 in the autumn, and it's a self-funded, self-motivated project, which happens generally on the weekends and our free time. And it's to document, discuss, and share experiences with fellow art, architecture, media collectives around the world. And the idea is to kind of discuss how we work, what motivates us, how we fund our projects, and our politics and these different topics. So we will address topics like shared authorship, activism, change of labor, work versus play, ad hoc versus bureaucratic. I'm reading this description here. Maybe a little bit from the early days. So we've addressed some of these issues. And then it basically archives our conversations we've had and these new connections we've made on our website for the future. And it's recorded there. So, and we're on off, like I mentioned. I'm Dan, this is Michael, and today we're talking with our new friend, Léopold Lambert, from Funambulist. Hi. Maybe you can introduce, you two can introduce yourselves.
Sure. Léopold Lambert, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Funambulist, and I'm here with Noel Galler.
Yeah. And I'm a part-time assistant here at Funambulist.
Okay, cool. Great. So let's just jump into the questions here. Our first question is, what is the Funambulist? Or I guess also, I know you have multiple projects, so maybe you can describe, what is your practice and all your different projects?
Mm-hmm. Perhaps I'll take the question even more literally in responding in what is actually a Funambulist, because that's a question I often get from people who don't necessarily speak Latin languages. But the Funambulist is a tightrope walker, and as the invitation of the event was suggesting. And the idea behind that is just the beauty of a figure walking on the line and somehow subverting the power of the lines that we usually put into design, not being stuck on one side or the other of the line, but sort of playing with the political power of the line, so to speak. But then to answer the question a little bit more about the project itself, the Funambulist started in 2010. It used to be mostly a blog that hosted articles that I would write from my own research, and also occasionally some guest essays as well. So it also became like a little series of books that collected those articles. But in 2013, it was mostly augmented by a podcast that has now, I think yesterday we published the 114th interview on this podcast. That was a way, because as I say, the blog was mostly my own work, and I'm being my work is also very it's going many places, but it's staying relatively shallow in all those places. So the podcast was really a way to talk to people who actually spend their entire research on one particular aspect. And that allowed me very much to learn so much from the people I was interviewing, and hopefully to have the audience. I was thinking maybe of a young, maybe student audience, learning also from this sort of alternative university. And then in 2015, the Funambulist kind of became a more ambitious project. Ambitious, maybe not as much for the in terms of ideas, but also just in terms of how do you back this up with an economy. And it became a magazine, and that comes out every other month. That's always dedicated to one particular topic that has to do with what the subtitle of the magazine suggests, which is the politics of space and bodies. You know, making this bridge really between both, because I think in the world of architecture we sort of understand what politics of space might entail, but maybe a little bit less so. I mean, depending on who's speaking, but at least as far as I'm concerned, I was not necessarily very versed in what we might call politics of bodies, and so it was very important that this editorial line was able to make these bridges. So the magazine is still going. We're working we're working quite hard on it, and it comes out every other month. So now the next one is coming in March, is number 10.
Okay. And it's the two of you that are the magazine operation at the moment, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But you also collect through your network, you collect essays and writings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, when you say the two of us, I think I mean it in a very logistic and
yes.
territorialized way in this little office. But as far as the people behind the magazines in general, obviously there's wonderful writers and contributors, and also a whole team of students that makes up the student section in each of the issues of the magazine, and we are working with an editor as well. I mean, an editor in terms of language corrector, copy editor, and you know, you always have to rely on friends' help every now and then as well. So there's actually in terms of deterritorialized, that's very hard to say, work on this magazine. There's a lot of people involved.
Yeah, and this podcast that you mentioned, you started this. You're in the 115th episode, and I mean that sounds kind of similar to the conference call. Like, I mean, it sounds like you started it also to find out, answer some questions, and have some dialogue and discussion with people that you wanted to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it is very similar. The main difference might be that one of the rules of the podcast is that I need to meet people in person. So it was also made at a time where I was living in New York, and I think there was many opportunities to also see whether people working and living in New York or people just visiting every now and then. But back when it started, the first year, or maybe during the year between 2013 and 2014, there was 2 conversations released every week, so it was quite intensive.
Okay, all right. High energy.
And how do you source contributors? Do you approach people, or do you accept submissions? How does that process work?
I mostly approach people for the reason that I actually think of a theme, of a topic, of an issue with some people in mind who would be great for it, hoping that they accept to write for this particular issue. But usually it makes up about, let's say, 50 to 60% of the writers, the contributors to one issue. So the rest comes from research on the topics that might indicate some other people, and sometimes, yes, a little bit of a more open-ended, not necessarily very formal call, but maybe asking a few people if they have an idea of who could be great for this issue. And sometimes people do send some text, and it's hard to be really on top on top of things in that manner. But you know, it did happen in the past that some texts were really excellent, and we thought that it'd be a good idea to integrate them. And then there's, as I said, there's a student section with student project, and this one is always an open call, trying to have many antennas in many schools of the world, and being able to have student works that touch the topic of the issue each time.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So this is the next question. Do you see your work relating to other similar publications, movements, or historical or contemporary things?
References.
References.
What's your start? How do you place yourself, I guess, in the landscape of architecture and publications, and like where do you see your inspirations?
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you have an idea?
I mean, as somebody that discovered the magazine only a few months ago, I didn't immediately recognize it as something architectural. It was something I could grasp in ways that if I looked at another type of architecture magazine, I probably would have a struggle with a little more, because I think this also encompasses the social just as much. But yeah, I don't know if you see it differently.
No, I mean, I actually, when you pronounce the word architecture, I think it brought me back to a world that I was not necessarily going for at this moment. But you're right. I mean, I'm a trained architect myself, and I think part of what I do is also based on a frustration in the world of architecture as being a little bit narrow-minded when it comes to questioning the politics of its responsibility, because I'm still very much convinced that our architecture is always more the problem than the solution, to put it in a sort of quick sentence. But still, within the world of architecture, I mean, if really that's where we're situating ourselves to answer your question, which is fair. I think I probably would find this publication as part of a movement that actually tried to really embrace the political effects of architecture, and that is composed by many young graduate architecture students who maybe have, as I like to say, I mean, I wrote that in another article, who might be less influenced by the writing, you know, of Le Corbusier, Robert Venturi, Adolf Loos, whatever, than by the writing of Hans Fanon, Angela Davis, or Judith Butler. So yeah, it's a sort of this paradoxical aspect of, like, if I'm situated somewhere within architecture, it would be in the people who are outside of architecture. So, but at least I think obviously, as we all know, there's not such strict borders between disciplines, and I think the sort of categorization within one discipline is also coming from a reading from the outside. When you work on it, you don't really think about that so much.
Yeah.
I think this is a good segue into the politics question, because I feel like when you're an architect or architecture student, dealing with politics is like you get disenchanted with architecture and the way architecture deals with like mainstream architecture maybe deals with politics or the system. So I was just wondering, yeah, in the beginning, like, was it this kind of a feeling with the world of architecture that led you into maybe more this other side, and publications and political theory, and yeah, well, like, how did you get turned on with the politics that you represented or that you believe in?
That's a big question. I think it was a fairly gradual thing, but yeah, I mean, one of the main arguments of this thinking is that you cannot escape from it. You can sort of ignore the politics that are involved within your work, but that doesn't mean you're not doing something about it. If you ignore them, then you probably will reinforce the sort of static quo logics of dominance that are going on. So trying to embrace, on the contrary, this political aspect of our work is a way to try to invert this logic of the static quo, but it's not always easy. Maybe what I might say is that's something that in the context of the publication we're trying to do as much as in the content as in the form, in how the publication is being made as well. And so obviously the contents are very explicitly political, if we may say. I mean, even saying it sounds a bit ridiculous actually. But there's, for example, money involved behind this, in the fact that the magazine is not just. I mean, it gets printed, so there's an economy behind it, and then it gets sold. So there's some logic behind that could. Again, we could decide to completely ignore, and then we would just again reinforce the logics at work. But actually, if you really decide to engage with those logics, then you're able maybe to have a little bit of agency in how you can turn something like money, again, which sounds very much like a dirty word, but what does that mean to really engage with those logics in a publication is something that I'm still. I mean, I don't know, something we talk about quite often, and we're experimenting on what can be done in this topic.
No, I think that was pretty sufficient.
Yeah. My other, I guess, personal interest is I noticed you and your work with your thesis project. I think in Palestine, you did this weaponized architecture at the beginnings of that. And how did you end up in Palestine, or like is it like something that you innately were interested in, or is there some story there?
I mean, maybe something I should say also is that there's really there's a differentiation that should be made also between something like the Funambulist as a project and my own work as a researcher and as a sort of architectural thinker, if I may say. That really needs to be more and more made, because especially with the Funambulist becoming more and more a collective work. So if you'd like to ask about that, then I should say this is really about the work that really only engages myself, I would say. But but in that case, in that case, I mean, when I wrote this book, Weaponized Architecture, and I went to Palestine for the second time back then in 2010. I went back precisely to do this work of documentation and of reflection in how, not just how architecture is used as a weapon in the context of the Israeli apartheid, because I think that's something that someone like Eyal Weizman has been doing in a quasi-exhaustive manner, really. But trying to think, okay, so how do we manage to be designers within this context as well, which is not some sort of ridiculous intervention that is in favor of like peace or something like that. I mean, in the context of Palestine, the very notion of peace or the very notion of conflict, I think, is extremely biased already in how you perceive the situation over there. So it was the second time. I went back a third time after that. I'm going back this summer, and I was not necessarily linked to the situation from a sort of family perspective myself, but I just got dragged into it in a very epidermic way almost, because when you find yourself in Palestine, then you realize you very much realize the violence of the logics at work over there. But I don't know. I feel a little bit odd saying all that, because it's really it's very much a discourse coming from the outside, I suppose. But I guess that's where that's where sort of European white guy might come from anyway in the situation. But yeah, I mean, this is some things that are Palestine is very much one of the main struggles that want to put some energy, effort, and reflection behind.
Okay.
So, what is the role, like, in your projects? Well, what kind of role maybe in this maybe with the Funambulist would you say does the reader have in what you do?
The public.
So what role does the reader have?
Well,
The public.
but perhaps if we're talking about the Funambulist, this might be the reader, or it could be something wider. There's a lot of I mean, the magazine itself has a lot of emphasis on popular political action, recent popular political action, Standing Rock and Black Lives Matter and that kind of thing. So maybe something to do with that as well. But just, yeah, thinking about the role that the public plays in what you do.
I mean, one thing I really think is powerful about the magazine is kind of that it forms this web of voices from all over the world, and it creates parallels that are there, but that so many people kind of go through life ignoring, especially when it comes to architecture, I think, and kind of schools of thought. So kind of having these contributors from all over the world, having people reading it all over the world, and knowing that it's sold in bookshops in Paris, in Los Angeles, but also in tiny towns in Mexico and all over the world, basically. I think there's something powerful about that, and I think it really kind of directs the way that content is made as well, making sure that it's accessible and understandable for people all over.
Yeah, I mean, the question of the public is always a difficult one, because it's what do we put behind this idea of the public? And I think when we talk about the magazine, there is much less a sort of propensity of the magazine to turn toward everyone, so to speak, even though obviously there's not a sort of a ban on anybody to read it. But I think it's much more conceived as a toolbox for people who might share a certain axiomatic vision of society in general, rather than trying to convince people who might not share the same axiomatic vision, because specifically the definition of axiomatic makes it just impossible to find common ground, so to speak. So I think this is something much more addressed to empower readers that might feel that might identify with the voices of contributors in the magazine.
Yeah, I think that kind of is quite an important thing, especially to provide that access to that kind of content, especially in an architectural or spatial context. Because as you were saying, like if maybe it's for these architecture students that are not reading Le Corbusier but are reading Judith Butler instead, it's good to have that content, especially for young architects, I think, and to kind of preach to the converted in that way is actually not such a terrible thing.
Yeah, and it might not be as much preaching to the choirs and just empowering the choir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're learning so much in this context. It's not at all about like a small group of people knowing exactly what's going on, and like so it's. I think the knowledge in this publication obviously comes much more from the contributors themselves. I mean, there's always one or two strong arguments, editorial arguments behind every issue that we get to define, but the knowledge itself and the visions that are proposed through this publication comes from the contributors themselves.
Yeah, which is exactly, you already started answering this question. So when you, like, how do you start out with, or like how flexible, how does it, an issue evolve or change when you set out a theme? Like, is there flexibility in there, or?
You mean once the topic is chosen?
I mean, okay. Also, like we usually talk to architects or like people that build structures. So these questions are maybe a different context for you as a publication. You know, like the public, and how you do this. Like, you know, how usually this question is like, if you draw a building, how like flexible are you to adapt it to the building site? But in your case, it's, I guess, a slightly different angle, because you probably come up with the topic and you try to keep it. You try to pick some essays that are most, you know, pertinent to the theme of the month. But like maybe the question is also, how do you decide the themes, or is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can sort of reinterpret the question through.
Please.
Yeah, no, but in some things that I already suggested, which is the moment in which the Funambulist currently finds itself, which is a moment of absolute autocracy from my end, to a moment of much more opening up, and with Noel here, and with maybe a few people who might join the team also in the few coming months. So it is a sort of, it is an autocracy that tries to become a little bit more democratic, so to speak, in a way that does not really already know how it's going to look like, but that's sort of trying on a daily basis, so to speak. So it's quite hard to speak about that in this very particular moment, but it is clearly information right now. The way the entire very inflexible structure might be able to gain a little bit of flexibility. I suppose. I don't know if you want to address that.
No, I mean, I think that's true. I haven't really seen any themes kind of have to change because of content that you're receiving. So I see the room for flexibility, but I haven't actually seen there need to be a need for it. Need for it.
Okay. Then everybody's favorite question.
How do you pay the bills? How do you pay projects?
It's a great question. I'm very thankful you're asking it to everyone, because it's some things that we find so vulgar to talk about, and then we end up not really helping each other with like some good strategy of how we deal with money and this kind of thing. So I think this could be like an entire conference series. Is like how does like small, let's say, for lack of a better word, leftist structures manage to deal with what has been described since the beginning as like the evil of money. So anyway, sorry, that's me commenting on the question rather than answering it. But sorry. I mean, as I was mentioning earlier, the magazine is an economy in itself. I mean, there is a tremendous amount of money to spend to make it happen, whether in the thing you might be thinking about. I mean, the printing of the magazine, the distribution of it as well, because I mean we're dealing with several hundreds of copies each time, and also the contributors being paid, ourselves trying to pay ourselves, and and yeah, I mean that's also part of what I was calling the politics of form earlier. Is like, how do we manage as well to pay the bills, but to pay everyone's bills as well? Because it's everyone who's working on this topic, contributors included, should be paid somehow, even though it might not be a gigantic amount of money. It should be happening. And so the most obvious answer is by the sales of the magazine itself, whether we're talking about sales online, sales on in bookstores, and subscriptions. So subscription, there's people paying every month, for example, and will last as long as they want. People will pay for a year. There's universities that pay a little bit more to get the subscription, so that's very helpful as well. And then, in addition of all that, I have to say I'm very thankful for a certain amount of publication and a certain amount of cultural institution for inviting me to talk through articles or through lectures in various places of Europe or the world. And maybe another aspect as well that we don't talk enough about as well is like, how do you negotiate your own, how do you negotiate being paid, for example? I mean, that's something that is as true for what we do here than for architects working in their office, than for what you guys do. And I think we never talk about it, and we never learn about it, and we feel very weird about it very often. And so that's something that, yeah, that needed to be learned and how to. So I mean, that's part of a whole world that has to do with precisely the money behind this project, which I'm very happy that we get to talk about that, because I think it's very important to sort of make the project survive while remaining within a sort of ethics system that we can improve on.
Yeah. What kind of cultural funding, like you say you're thankful to cultural funding from Europe and that kind of thing. What kind of things have you received in the past?
Yeah. Actually, when I was saying that, I meant for institutions that might invite me to give lectures and pay for it. But actually, you're right. We did receive last year a very generous grant from the Brown Foundation, and they've been supportive of the Funambulist for the third time now, and it's pretty. I'm very thankful to this kind of institution, not just because they gave us money, but just because they really. I see all the projects that they're supporting every year, and I think they have a very high standard of projects that they want to back up. So
yeah, and they're quite good at continually funding good projects over again. I know that you've received it twice, so and they seem to have a habit of doing that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, do you have interns? And if so, how are they compensated? I guess this kind of follows on from the last question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we just talked about. I mean, I don't consider Noel as an intern, even though for logistical reasons, you are. But yeah, well, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually first reached out to the organization about volunteer, to the Funambulist about volunteer opportunities, and then they said, well, I believe in paying employees for doing work. So logistically, it makes sense for myself to kind of call this an internship for school. But I mean, while I'm here, Léopold treats me like I work here. It hasn't really been an internship. In the sense, like, I haven't had to make coffee for him or anything like that.
Typical job, intern job, right?
But I mean, in terms of moving forward, there was somebody that's going to be doing an internship here in the summer.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that. I missed some things here because we have an unexpected guest. Do you know Léopold, maybe? No. Sorry.
It's all right.
So let's move on to my favorite question, which is always tricky for people. In your years of working in this field, like, what's some recollection that is like your proudest moment, something you're kind of like a big hurrah, and then also in parallel, what's like what you would consider a big failure, maybe some things to learn from? And you can split it up, or you can take in both, each, or however you like. I mean, I feel.
I mean, we launched the magazine in August 2015 at eFlux in New York, and New York again being a city that I consider a little bit like home because I lived there for quite a few years, and having 3 contributors who are also friends with me to present the magazine, and seeing like about 100 people coming in and being very involved in the conversation and everything. That's kind of the moment that comes to mind. There's been other presentation of the kind that worked super well as well, but this one was very moving because it was the very beginning of the project. I mean, it was not the beginning of the project specifically. It was 6 months of work that became tangible through this first issue of the magazine. So that was very that was something to feel good for. In terms of failure, I don't think there's been like one moment where just like the roof collapsed or anything like that, but I think in general, I mean, especially recently, just making an assessment on the forces that we are up against has something frankly depressing.
Yeah.
We talk about quite often, and it can have, if it's not well approached, it can have some very paralyzing effects. So that's something to be careful of, because I don't think it had any paralyzing effect in any way, but I think it's kind of a sort of heavy weight that's almost there, and that we need to deal with. And I think when you talk with activists, they're I mean, very involved activists, in particular in queer struggle or anti-racism struggle, and they really engage with this sort of emotional fatigue that might come from struggles that are so asymmetrical in the forces that they're opposing, that there needs to be a sort of life hygiene, so to speak, that allows to rest, almost like something that feels almost, we feel almost guilty to rest now in a time that we are. But I think it's also tremendously important. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, it's work for people to have to just explain why they're screaming out or why they're out on the streets protesting things. It's absolute work. So if the Funambulist can help shed light on that in any way, then it's better for us.
Yeah. So it's some good inspiration for future issues, also.
Yeah. Emotional work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional. Yeah.
Okay. So that's all your questions.
Yeah. You're finished with your favorite one.
We checked all our boxes.
Good.
Is there anything else that you have on your mind or you wanna add?
I don't know what's in the boxes behind you guys.
Yeah, I've been looking at them.
This is
Screws and nails.
we have a very small studio, so we have to be very organized. So
Yeah.
we have the baker boxes, Kisten, that we have. I label them all with my handwriting here. So there's
This
like
one's not your handwriting.
that one's one just for cable ties.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, it's like
Big cable ties.
when you're in the middle of a project and you need something, you usually need cable ties.
Yeah, no, but if you need the cable ties, they won't be in this box.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah.
when you don't need them, they'll be in the box.
You know, the usual rule.
Aesthetically organized,
But yeah, hopefully one day you guys come to Berlin, we can show you around, give you a tour. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to meet you guys. Electronic meeting, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll meet in real life.
Yeah,
sometime.
sounds good.
Thanks for
All right,
talking.
well, good night.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.